Welcome back. Welcome back to the VSSW. I hope you had a very good break. We're going to start our second panel discussion, Finding Gold Dust, Mentorship in the Avalanche Industry. I hope you enjoyed that sponsor video. We were showcasing the American Avalanche Association, VEASAN, and as part of this panel discussion, I'd also like to mention our other sponsors, Avalanche Canada, CIL, and TEC. Now we're going to show that same video again at the end of the session, and that will take us out to the break at the end of this session. So just before I introduce our moderator for this session, I do want to mention that we have Grant Statham working in the back end, and he's working the chat box, and so some of the comments may have his heading there, the title, and he'll do his best to try and show where those actually come from. So if you see multiple comments coming through from Grant, they are not all from him, although he may add his own comments as he sees fit to this. So to lead the discussion and act as moderator for this panel, I'm very pleased to introduce Mike Kopang. Mike lives in Canmore, Alberta, and works as a public safety specialist and avalanche forecaster for Alberta Parks in Kananaskis country. Over to you, Mike.
All right, so thanks everyone for, I see the 285 people, the number keeps ticking up. So we have 4 of us, and the idea is we're just gonna kind of just shoot the breeze about mentorship as opposed to a formal, everyone gets sort of a session to discuss their practices with it. So encourage people to certainly introduce questions as we're going along, or throw some stuff out in the chat box, and we'll kind of bring it into the conversation back and forth sort of throughout the next while. So first of all, we'll just introduce a few people here. The first one, and I guess as I read your name, you can click on here. Rosemary Langford. She's a master's student out of Simon Fraser University, focusing on terrain assessment, public education, also the president of Mountain Mentors on the BC coast. So that's one of our panel members here. The other one is Doug Shabbat. He's an avalanche forecaster, runs the Gallatin National Forest Center, and also a veteran alpinist, an alpine guide, based out of Bozeman, Montana, and he's hanging out in his climbing gear room, showing off all the climbing gear. I think Rosemary even has her mountain bike behind her. We also have Rune, who's the head of the Glacier Ice and Snow section at the Norwegian Water Resources and Energy Directorate based in Oslo, and also an associate professor at the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø. Thanks, Rune. And then we also have a fairly close neighbor of mine just down the road here, Lisa Paulson, who's an ex-park warden, a veteran avalanche guide, forecaster, and a search and rescuer from Parks Canada based out of Banff. So thanks everyone, first of all, for showing up. And yeah, it should be kind of fun here. So the idea is we just wanted to kind of talk about mentorship, and everyone knows that mentorship is a critical part of the learning and career development process within this industry especially. And the idea is we wanted to see what you guys had for mentorship, what you learned from mentorship, some takeaways. And we all can understand that the whole idea with mentorship is it's sort of that critical relationship between somebody that's got, you know, more years of experience, more knowledge, and more connections within the industry and sort of the fields in general, that they can pass that on down to somebody who's fairly junior coming up. You know, I've had the opportunity in my career to have a variety of different mentors moving through different sectors in the avalanche industry, and there's been some good, there's been some bad, there's been some people that presented some great opportunities for learning, and sometimes you have to really work pretty hard to seek out these mentors and really want to get that mentorship from them. And sometimes it can be easy to find them, and sometimes it can be fairly challenging to find those mentors. So I guess the first thing we wanted to just kind of chat about is like, in terms of your mentorship, what do you see mentorship as being, you know, to somebody? What is it you're trying to start off with? And we might as well start with who's the furthest away, and that's Rune.
Can you hear me now?
We got you clear.
Excellent. Well, I think mentorship to me, it's like kind of an informal thing. I never had any like formal mentor except from, I guess my teacher tried to be my mentor at school when I was little. But to me, it's like an informal thing where you try to learn something or have somebody to actually check out the difficult questions or problems with. and had different people that have had that function during the years.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense. And like I don't know if it's anything different really, and there's a formal process between Europe and North America here, but Doug, you kind of seeing the same idea there?
Yeah, I see mentorship is definitely an informal process versus, we'll say, like an internship, which is something which is a little more formal with guidelines. I see mentorship is more like being a guide to someone versus like just being a coach. So you actually get to, you get to know their lives a little more. They get to know more your lives. And there's no end to it necessarily. It's not like, oh, your mentorship ends in April. Like it's an ongoing thing that you as a mentor buy into and the mentee buys into as well, that you're building a relationship. And a lot of times it's, at least at the start, it's not even identified. You don't come right out and use those words.
Yeah, so it's more of a personal kind of a based thing.
Yes.
Rosemary?
Yeah, totally. I think I agree with that. And I think the kind of starting point of an expert or someone with more knowledge passing it on to a less experienced person is a really good place to start. And then I think what I think of mentorship is as it relates to leadership. So where we have a mentor acting as a leader and kind of creating a space where conditions exist where someone who doesn't have that experience or expertise can kind of step in and rise to the occasion or step into a new zone. So it's almost like a chance for people who have more experience to say, okay, where are the spaces where I feel confident and comfortable and at ease, and who doesn't feel like that in these spaces? And then it's kind of this courageous act towards designing experiences where people can come in and be like and learn and be safe. And I agree, it doesn't always have to be in that formal capacity.
Yeah, and that seems to be the theme through like a bunch of people I talked to before this conversation started is, should it be formal, should it be informal? And obviously both have strengths and weaknesses to those two different styles of learning it, but having it being an informal thing, do you think there's any problems with that? I'm kind of looking more at you, Lisa. Like in your career, have you seen sort of that informal mentorship process having had any negative aspects to it?
Well, my experience has been more like many of you, the informal avenue. And it's never been something super structured. I've found that there might be a facet of somebody's experience where they have more experience. It might be a friendship relationship, and we're out to doing something where my colleague or co-worker or a friend would have a little bit more experience in certain areas, and I'd just be looking to learn from them. So there's this open, receptive approach on my behalf as wanting to learn, and their behalf on wanting to share. And it could be with respect to skills or leadership styles or just their approach to problem solving. It could be very broad. And I look back at people that have really contributed to my development, and it's like a garden. You just sort of grab pieces as needed. I guess the drawback from that is it's not maybe as efficient as something that could be a little more structured and where you'd kind of go through a process. And in Parks Canada, we've certainly developed models like that, working with Parks Canada myself. I think that might be maybe one of the drawbacks is it is up to the mentoree to sort of establish what they're looking for, and versus something a little more structured that would give a little bit more direction, be more efficient.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that, like the leadership styles. And this is just kind of to everybody here. Like, have you ever had any times though wherein somebody has pushed a leadership style on that was maybe not effective, or they've pushed their biases or their problems that they've seen onto you, or tried to drive you towards sort of furthering what they see as their problems and their biases?
Are you asking me?
Any one of you guys, yes, has anyone seen that? Where you've had a problem with sort of their leadership style being sort of pressured onto you a little bit? There's a lot of contemplative.
I mean, yes, but it's welcome. When I was a mentee, it was welcome when, maybe not at the time, like if someone was kind of scolding me or telling me I was blowing it, you know, I definitely took that to heart. You know, I'd rather they weren't saying that, but in the end, I was glad they were.
Yeah, I think a key issue here when it comes to mentorship and leaders trying to do something to others is, you know, if do you want to help somebody to become better, you know, or solve something? Do you want to be a person that assists or creates the possibility of getting out of a problem or somebody else to get better without yourself getting something back from it, you know? And the situation you described is maybe more like a person that is giving you a task or asking you to sort something out that is kind of really tricky or difficult, rather than providing the help to actually do it. And I think that can be really tricky, and that's not a good mentorship. I think that's rather wanting the best for the other person, really. I think that's the basic of good mentorship. Of course, not always providing the answer or explanation, but rather, you know, fitting the perspective and asking questions, starting to reflect on things, maybe, because could be you can have more experience maybe than the other one.
Yeah, and there's definitely those different styles out there, whether mentorship should be more of a formal documented process, say like a carpenter kind of a style, where in the avalanche industry, we more just kind of find somebody, we kind of slide underneath their wing and kind of see what was going on with it. So there's sort of those two different styles out there, and from both sides. I don't know if anyone has more experience of being like, how do they actually go out and seek to find a mentor based on the career patch that you're in? Like looking towards you, Rosemary, what have you seen when you tried to actually get out there and seek out a mentor?
Yeah, it's funny to think about that for me. I feel like in my position with Mountain Mentors and probably the experience of the co-founders of the program as well, is that our focus has been on like facilitating intentionally mentorship for other people. And so if I think about for myself, like what steps have I taken to actually seek mentorship? I don't know that I've sought mentorship in kind of a formal capacity. And I think what I've learned from the experiences that I have had are just more in reflection of like, okay, maybe that was a mentor, but never asked the awkward question of like, so are we like official mentor pairs now? And yeah, I think to some extent having like a formal documented process is actually really helpful in that way. Like if there's like a platform to facilitate those relationships that provide that accountability and a mutual understanding of why you're both coming into that experience, and kind of being able to outline together what shared goals you have or what commitments you have to each other. So yeah, I don't know that I can exactly speak to what my pursuit of my own mentors has been, but in terms of facilitating those relationships for other people, I think there is something of value there in kind of a not necessarily a formalized process, but like intentional design of that kind of platform, I guess.
Anybody else?
Rosemary, I think that's a really good point that I hadn't thought of, which is, you know, when I look back at people that were mentors to me, they had skin in the game. You know, we both, either they were my boss or they were a climbing partner or a peer in an industry or a teacher of some sort, where, you know, it was structured anyway, and then the mentorship kind of flowed from that, but there was some kind of guardrails on the relationship.
Lisa Arun, do you have anything to add to that?
In terms of forming or finding the path to mentorship, is that?
Do you think it should be more of a formalized process or more of an informal process, like within this industry, you know, sort of like taking, for example,
I think it can be both, but I don't think, you know, certain organizations, it's kind of up to some organizations and to kind of create that avenue. When I think back to, you know, starting out, I thought, you know, in terms of the mentee, there's a bit of a buy-in, like you have to go out and actually seek some training, get something behind you that you can bring to the table. And it might be in terms of getting your first job in the industry. Or a good avenue is volunteering and looking for those niches where you can just go, hey, can I come out and join you in this particular avenue? And some of those avenues are becoming more formalized in terms of setting up a role for volunteering. But, you know, looking within your organization, looking for those avenues where you could create those volunteer roles, where you could bring people in that they could mentor a bit. And so it's up to the mentoree to sort of seek some of those connections out. And then eventually you get the jobs, and you start to build your own network of connections where you can then find who you relate well with and can learn from.
Yeah, I think speaking from the from Norway, we've been setting up the National Avalanche Warning Service over the last 11-12 years, and it's been like we've been in need of mentors, especially in the beginning. We were not dealing with avalanches as such as an organization, you know, and for us it was, you know, it's not like maybe the mentorship you talked about now, but for us it was really important to go and visit and create contact, you know, with people that we could trust. It could be like the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute, the Met Office, or go abroad. You know, we went to Canada, we went to France, Switzerland, Germany, and so on, and to meet up with others, you know, that we could ask questions, find out how they were thinking, what were their problems, and discuss things, you know, and try to, of course, then as a group trying to find out how we should develop a service in Norway. And I think that kind of, it's not that personal, but it's so important to be able to link up. And what we experienced, that was we were met with open what do you call it? Open arms, you know, like people, we felt that it was honest meeting, it was open meeting, and people share their experiences, and also they told us about their dreams, kind of. So that created some mentorship after that we could actually keep contact and ask if there were tricky things that we had to decide, or, you know, which way to go. So I think that's maybe more on the organizational side, but it was extremely important for the key people involved. You know, how should we set this up? Getting the experience, but also, you know, getting the honest advice from different people around the world was really, really useful. And then we have about 100 observers now. A lot of people didn't know, you know, it was no like professional sector we could draw people from to actually become observers, and of course mentoring is an important part of developing a safety culture, and, you know, interest, motivation. A lot of these observers are working on their own, and we had to look at different ways of doing it rather than having two people linking up for several years. We had to go and visit people, create connections to people, and also have some way of meeting either digital or that people go and visit each other. Yeah, so it was mentoring in a way or another. Meeting different people was an extremely important part of that journey, definitely.
Yeah, and for that meeting people for actually seeking out a mentorship, like, is there a better way you think it should be done? Should people offer up to be mentors? Should we have some kind of a process where somebody can say, hey, I'm interested in mentoring somebody in the guiding industry, the ski hill industry, the highways industry? Should we sort of structure something like that? And we all know that some people will look at the opportunity to be a mentor as, sweet, I get some free labor. Can you go shovel off the roof over there? You don't necessarily get the experience. Or should we try to ensure that we get the best amount of quality mentorship by having people actually hang a shingle outside the door saying, I'm interested in being a mentor? And then how do we link those two people up? Rosemary.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, thank you. That's such a good question. And I was kind of going to say that, just like listening to the experiences that the other panelists have shared. I think that we do require some like we all need to be advocates a bit on the behalf of mentees, that in recognition of the huge amount of courage it takes to like reach out and say, I need mentorship, or I need assistance, or these are the things I don't know, and here's what I want to accomplish. That's actually a really, really hard thing to do, especially if you don't see yourself represented in the folks that you're looking for mentorship from already. On the kind of other side of that, and I think also in many ways related to that, we do need mentors to offer their services. And I think part of what that takes is encouraging mentors, possible or potential mentors, to recognize the value that they could get from a mentorship experience. Because, you know, asking ourselves, what can we do with mentees that we couldn't otherwise do? Like, what are we able to accomplish that we wouldn't if we didn't have these opportunities to pass along our knowledge? I think in large part what that is creating an industry where people feel like psychologically and physically safe. And mentors, as these kind of like honeypots of information, are actually a way to encourage like the continued safety or the, you know, kind of opportunities to share knowledge that we all know is difficult to pass on, like that experience or expertise-based knowledge. And so I think having a platform where folks are encouraged to say, yeah, I'm really excited to mentor, like these are the things that I want to share. Here's what I expect from a mentee, and a mentee could be like, hey, I could do that. Like, I want to learn those things, and they can come together in a more, I guess, level and safe place than the kind of like cold call and be like, can you take me out? Or yeah, there's so much value in there for mentors as well. So I think that's such an important question.
Anyone want to add to that? Nope.
We've tried to formalize the entrance point. I think I think, you know, that you dare to get in contact with people. I think that's a quite crucial point, and make that easy is a good thing. And one contact point that we have is with the universities. So we try to provide data for students. We try to be present at some of the lectures. We try to have some co-supervisors, and like informally, and sometimes we give maybe small jobs, just, you know, just to connect people, and then it will go from there. You know, people connect up and they find out that they can actually benefit from actually working together or learning from each other. And also it's mentorship. It's not always the older mentoring somebody younger. It's, you know, it's really inspiring with the way young people can come up with really good questions and look at it from a totally different perspective. So it can be actually working both ways. And I think creating this meeting, what do you call it, like connections, I think it's important to create a lot of those. I'm a bit skeptical. I'm not sure if, like, for us, for example, it would be possible to create like a formalized mentorship program where you actually had to dedicate, like, you know, 500 hours to be a mentor, kind of. It's kind of a bit tricky to put that in between the job kind of situation. Yeah.
I guess the question is, how did you guys go about finding your first mentor? Like, how did you determine who was the appropriate person to be mentored by, and how did you actually seek that person out? Doug, you've been kind of, I'm looking at all your climbing gear behind you, so somebody showed you how to use it in the industry.
Yeah, well, there's, you know, I think that I wasn't, at the start, I wasn't seeking out a mentor. I just, it kind of fell into place where, you know, early on with the climbing, you know, that was Alex Lowe was very instrumental, you know, and by allowing me at the start to even climb with him, I felt quite honored, and, you know, and that grew into a great relationship. And then professionally, at the Avalanche Center, it was, you know, Carl Berkland. You know, he hired me in 1995, and, you know, he's become and remains an amazing mentor to me over all these years, even though this is probably the first time he's even heard it. Like, we haven't like had big discussions about it or anything, but he has helped me. You know, he's the person who I lean on when I have questions or I have problems, you know, with things about avalanches, and he's been there giving great advice. So I think it's not, for me, it wasn't a process that started, it was just ended up, I became, you know, it developed into a relationship. It's kind of, you know, thinking about mentorship, it's kind of like dating. You know, you're kind of like, oh, you know, I'm gonna go on a few dates and see what happens, and, you know, and then soon you find yourself hanging out with the same person all the time, and you're like, okay, I guess you're my girlfriend now. And then it's like, well, how do you continue it going? You know, it takes energy, it takes work, and it requires a lot of communication, and a lot of wonderful things come from it.
No, it's cool. That's great. That's kind of what we're kind of trying to lead into here. And I'm reading through the chat room here, a couple of questions, and it's like, you're saying you ask somebody, or you go to one of your feasibly your mentors, and you say, hey, look, here's this problem I'm trying to deal with. How do I solve it? Like, what's the best way to sort of strategize, you as a mentor, passing off your information down to that next person? Like, how do you share your knowledge and skills without just simply telling somebody how to do it? Like, what strategies have you used? Like, looking towards you, Lisa, like, you've been around a long time doing this stuff now for a while, which is great. There's a depth of knowledge within you, and then how do you pass that on?
Well, I find I try and determine what they're looking for, and try to define some expectations, and being respectful of how they might want to receive some feedback, and in the manner in which it's given. And you know, I'm a big believer too in a bit of self-discovery, but yet providing a little bit of guidance when needed to step in, if needed, if it could just sort of give a little crutch to help figure something out. And I find the way people want to receive feedback, it varies. It varies so much, and it can be so informal that how you sort of interject, you just I think have to be respectful of that person and where they're at in their learning curve. I mean, I've appreciated when people have approached me that way, so I just try and incorporate those concepts when I'm with. I was just out on a long horse trip with somebody that's working on some skills still, and just sort of interjecting where it would be helpful, but without offering too much and overwhelming. Yeah.
And I think that's almost what we heard from a lot of people that I just kind of asked around, is like they didn't even realize they were in a mentorship. Like, it was such a subtle thing where they'd sought somebody out.
Yeah, and it was by no means a formal relationship. I have been in more formal relationships where you're coaching other people and you have a little checklist of things you're trying to do, and you know, things seem a little more streamlined. But I think for me, the most valuable mentorship have been those informal relationships, like the one just described, where this person has not only given me some good guidance, but maybe gave me a bit of a confidence boost as well, that, you know, I can move forward, charge forward with solving a problem.
And I guess that kind of leads into something else we were talking about, is like, at what point do you think you're able to be a mentor versus, at what stage in the game, like in your career? It's hard to say. Like I said, there's not sort of these formal timelines when it's like you've worked in this industry for 10 years, you can now begin to mentor somebody. At what stage in the game do you think you're appropriate to be a mentor to somebody else? Rune?
Well, to be honest, I feel like everybody else knows much more than me, so I normally go to others. But I think you can be a mentor at any time. I mean, you can be. It depends on the you know, what the subject is, you know, and sometimes it's just solving a problem. Other times it's like growing into something that requires a lot of time. But I think it's if you create a connection between people, the two people we're talking about will understand that is something to develop, to put it like that. And I think that can be, age doesn't have to have that much to say about it. And I think at different points in time, if I look at myself, I needed different kind of mentors, I think. You know, it could be management, it could be like getting a perspective that is a bit larger, or it could be learning more about snow, or it could be safety, or, you know, it can be different aspects, and seldom you find all these aspects in one person, you know. And I think it's also when you're approached by somebody that would like to learn something or discuss something, to know what you can help with, and point to other people. You know, if I mean, if others can provide better, you know, better mentorship, and sometimes it's I think it's just to be there and ask questions back as well, you know, so you can reflect on things. I think can be quite important as a mentor, you know, not providing the answer, but actually create like a learning interest for learning. Yeah, that you're interested in to learn more. And I think that goes for organizations as well, that you have a learning organization is extremely important, where we just, you know, the fact is that people make mistakes. That's no mistake. That's just how we are, and it's great that we do that, because we, you know, we can learn from it. And we have to be really, I think it's important to be very honest about it, not trying to hide things, but be honest. And yeah, I think that's important for a mentor as well, that you can, if you meet a mentor, or if you want to use somebody as a mentor, you can trust that person. Yeah.
Mike, I'm catching myself reading the chats on the side as they come in, and I want to point out to everyone that's on this panel, or you know, is watching this panel, that Eva has had some really good comments, and Eva and Aleph. Eva's at the Alaska Pacific University, and Aleph is a forecaster at Chugach Avalanche Center. They've done 2 studies, actual research, one quantitative, one qualitative, on mentorship. And so Eva posted the links in the chat to their research, which I think would be really great for people that are interested in this to read. I actually read the papers again this morning to kind of get ready for our panel, but you know, I consider them sort of experts on this topic as well. So maybe at some point, if there's the raise hand feature, we can get one of them kind of getting their feedback on a few things.
For sure, yeah, it's a great idea. And like reading through some of the comments, they're great. It talks about here, one person says that it's we found that most successful mentorships were actually initiated by mentors. Like we're actually seeking out somebody to pass our knowledge on to. Is that a better way of doing it than somebody maybe trying to find a mentor? Like, is there somewhere that we meet in the middle? Like, what is the best way to actually, do you want to have to pass on your information, or do you want to have somebody come to you? What's the best way to go about that? Rosemary?
Yeah, I think that kind of comes back to the idea of like recognition of, yeah, what value you can bring as a mentor. And I do think there is a strong argument to be made for having a platform, whatever it may look like, where that happens. And I mean, just to speak from the Mountain Mentors experience, that's kind of what we do, is like, you know, we'll open up applications, and mentors and mentees both apply to the program. One of the interesting things is just as many people who say in their applications as mentees, like, I'm nervous, I'm uncertain, I don't know if I'm confident or good enough to do this, we get an equal number of mentors who email saying, I don't know if I'm ready to do this. Do you think my skills are adequate? Like, do I even have anything to share? And so to give a foundation that says to mentors who are asking themselves that question, like, yes, of course, you do have something to share, and to come back to that idea of like, at what point are you ready to be a mentor, is like, if you can extend your experience and expertise and create room for somebody else and listen to them and be safe, like while you're doing all of that, then you're probably ready. And so having a foundation that both maybe supports mentors in acknowledging their own potential to act as mentors, but also to support mentees and connecting with those people, I think is really important, because as much as mentees may lack confidence in their direction in the industry or in their abilities in the backcountry, I think mentors are just as likely to say, I'm not sure, I'm afraid, I'm uncertain, I need some support in this. And I think you do need like a foundation in some way to offer that support to both mentees and mentors. Yeah.
No, it's great. And hey, Grant, if you said there's a couple people that had a question from the floor, if you want to take one of them here right now.
Yeah, we got a couple folks on the floor here, Mike. First person is Curtis Pollock. Go ahead, Curtis.
Thanks, guys. Awesome topic. One I was pretty eager to listen to. A few things I just really agree on is the mentees. You know, they certainly have to have some buy-in and skin in the game. It it is a challenge to get mentorship, but it comes at a cost for both parties. So I do totally agree. Love the idea of the mentorship availability kind of platform. I think that's rad. People who are willing, I think you're not going to find all your mentors there, but it'll be easier to find some. Big question though. I work as a sled guide, snowmobile-based avalanche instructor. We do a lot of mentorship, but we also see a challenge in our industry with perceived incompatibility from the user group, meaning the mentor or the mentee might not have the skill to potentially go out in the field, work together in an outside environment. So based on our industry, what forms of mentorship would you suggest where field time might not be the best option? And I ask that in a few ways. I think it would bring more people together from potentially incompatible field days, but it also helps out with distance travel and maybe expense of both the mentor and the mentee. So again, what forms of mentorship are suggested where field time isn't the best or only option? Dun, dun, dun.
Everyone's eyes are looking up. Nobody wants to answer first.
Yeah, I could just say some of the things that we've been doing with the observers. We have forecasters and observers, and as I said, it's about 100 and spread throughout the country, and some are at Svalbard, and there's great distances between each observer normally. And we've been using it more and more. We're using some kind of workshops where we actually target some of the problematic things that have been between, like, it could be communication between people, or it could be understanding the situation and relaying it in the forecast, or it could be other things, like the continuity between observers, for example, that are actually sharing things. We've been doing that sometimes digitally, because traveling is, it's costly, and with COVID, it's been impossible. So I think that's actually worked surprisingly well. And I think for some that has felt like a kind of a mentorship, that you're actually able to share your ideas and you voice your concern and discuss it, So it's not one-to-one, and sometimes it is, but mostly it's been small groups, and I think that's a way of actually not being in the field, but you have to have something concrete, some good examples to actually, work out from.
The common thread, it seems like, between at least my relationships that I've had with mentors or mentees is trying to have careers where we get paid to go outside. And so field time is a crucial part of, the mentor-mentee process. So person who asked the question, that'd be really hard to have, anything meaningful over time if you weren't able to share, especially in the avalanche context is what we're talking about, without being able to go in the field. And, I'm glad you asked that, saying you're a snowmobile guide, because I was a mentee of two brothers, Cliff and Dale Gullett. They ran a snowmobile shop in Bozeman, and I was a new director of the Avalanche Center, had 5 years of very limited snowmobile experience, and they took me under their wing, and over the next 8 to 10 years, they mentored me in snowmobiling, and it changed my life, and it changed the way I ride, and it was amazing. And so something as simple as even just starting as a business relationship where I'm just trying to get them to post the advisories on their front desk, turns into this amazing relationship that we still have, or I have with one of them, is incredible. So yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah, Curtis, I also think that's such a good question, and maybe to offer a bit of a different perspective, I guess mostly Mountain Mentors works with recreationists, so it is a bit different than the professional avalanche industry. But from my perspective, a lot of the really meaningful parts of mentorship actually happen before you go into the field. And if I think about like how that relates to my own day or my own experiences in the backcountry, and I think about kind of a trip planning or pre-brief time to kind of set the tone for what the day looks like, where you're like determining objectives, you're identifying potential human factors, you're making observations on conditions that have existed or other people's observations. I think all those things are probably metaphors for what could happen before you go into the field as a mentorship pair. And I think actually in order to have success in the field in a mentorship context, you have to have built that trust ahead of time. It's the same, for me, it's a lot of the same process that I would have going out in a day of backcountry skiing or riding or snowmobiling, whatever it is. And so I think what we learn about in Mountain Mentors about what mentorship is it extends far beyond people's experience in the mountains, and it's those experiences outside of the field context that actually create meaningful experiences and safe experiences for both the mentee and the mentor, because it can be a really intimidating environment to teach those things. And if you're pairing with someone and you're like, I don't even know what kind of transceiver you use yet, we haven't gone over those questions, it's definitely that's a risk as well associated with it. So yeah, I guess to speak to the importance, and I don't know if there's like a specific form of mentorship that happens outside of the field, but I think the same things we think of a field-based mentorship have to happen actually from the comfort of your living room with a coffee or a beer, depending on the time of day.
I can sort of apply what you're saying, Rosemary. I work for Parks Canada out of Banff, like Grant who spoke earlier, and we're a network of rescue services for the mountain parks. And when we get rescues in Kluane, which is very far north, we can't shuttle up there so easily to offer some guidance and support for the staff there. And similarly to Watertown, where we have some junior members that are coming up through the ranks of ACMG training and learning some leadership and decision-making risk management strategies. So we have a process where we have built that relationship, bringing those staff members to the Banff area, so we all get to know them and know how they approach problems. They join us on rescues, and then they go back to their respective parks, and if they get an incident, it's a conversation on the phone often. We may still be sending staff to support them, but having that initial trust and understanding of where these people are, what type of people, how they make their decisions, has really formed a good basis to offer some advice moving forward when we get those calls. And so creating that rapport, I think, does make it possible to have non-field-based mentorship and guidance.
And it seems like you've all kind of talked on this too. It's almost like there's two streams of mentorship. There's almost a recreational stream when you're outside and just having fun with somebody and trying to learn from their experience. And there seems like there's a professional stream wherein you're actually going through a formal process, maybe as a junior employee, moving up to a more senior forecaster, or working your way through the ranks. And it seems like they both kind of complement each other. Those two different streams, even though they are perhaps two different mentors. Now, having said that, have you ever had any disagreements with a mentor that you've been working with, and how do you go about resolving it? Like if you saw somebody doing something, you're like, you know what, maybe they're not using the technology that's available, social media or whatever, but there's obviously times you've probably had a disagreement with somebody that was perhaps mentoring you. And how did it go? Or perhaps none of you have ever had a disagreement with any mentors, ever. None. Well, think about that one for a bit. We'll come back to that one if you've ever had a disagreement with anything. But there's another.
I have had problems with a mentor before, and thought I might just offer them right here. I was once pulled off the side of the mountain on a short rope and took a 20-meter whipper by my mentor. It crashed into the ground. It was okay. Continued to walk, and moved on. And it's funny, it's one of those things that in hindsight, I don't think I would have considered that person to be my mentor until I was able to look back on it later. There was lots of lessons over the years I learned from that person. that was one of them, and it wasn't a great lesson, but you know what? I learned a lot from that lesson. I made a mistake and I got punished, and it was a harsh way to do it, and was very upsetting. But again, you know, with the benefit of hindsight and lots of years gone by now, I learned a huge lesson, and I've never made that mistake since. And so maybe like Doug mentioned earlier, I guess I didn't want to hear it at the time, but as I look back on it, that kind of hard school lessons, they were good for me.
No, that's great. And I've seen this come up a few times, and we had this in one of our sort of topics that we talked about before, is should mentorships end? Like looking back at mine, a lot of my mentorships, I don't think they've ever formally ended. Like, I saw no reason to them formally end. They could still pass on information. But at what stage does a relationship end? Doug?
Yeah, I think, well, they either die or you still have them, or occasionally it just sunsets. It just kind of, you move on where, you know, the guidance they were providing you and, you know, the relationship you had just kind of drifts off. So I've had all three happen.
Anybody else have any different experiences with that, where, or you maybe it's ended, or you've chosen to leave for some certain reason, or something's gone on with it and you felt a need to leave?
I feel the ones where I spent, you know, early in my career, I spent a bit of time volunteering, and those seem to have more of an ending because I went to a different chapter. I might have gone on to a different, living in a different area, and just don't have contact with that people or that program anymore. And then other relationships, as Doug mentioned, they continue. So I've had personally a variety, but I think the ones that are a little more formal in nature seem to, for me, have had more of a finish, whether it's a volunteer or a work opportunity where I reached out to a group of people. Yeah.
Now, Kurt, why don't we bring up that other question from the floor there, Brent?
Sure, we have another question from the floor from Brad Carafil. Go ahead, Brad. Hello, Brad. You're on the floor if you'd like to bring up a question. Looks like Brad may have had his question answered, possibly.
Already worked our way through it here. Okay, no, it's totally great. In terms of the one question I get a lot from people is, how do you connect with a mentor? I get that all the time. So it's just like, what should we be doing better to sort of offer our skills up as a mentor, besides sort of having that, you know, hey, there's a job opportunity out there. Like, what are our best ways to provide mentorship? I think I get that question a lot. Like, what can I do to become sort of more involved and get out there and be with you more?
Right. Well, he can just unmute himself.
Are you asking me? I'm sorry, I lost the thread there a little bit. Mike, are you asking me that question? I heard the question.
Anybody that question, because that's the question I seem to hear the most. And sort of when we discuss this panel with a variety of people, it's like, I'd love to learn how to connect with mentors better. You know, so what should we be doing to sort of provide that information, or let ourselves know that we're willing to be able to be a mentor to somebody? What's some strategies that we could do on the flip side in terms of letting that knowledge out?
Yeah, probably a really good first step would be to give people an opportunity to reflect on what they're really good at. I think that there's probably a general feeling, and I mean, maybe it's different, but I think with people in general, that they don't want to, you know, be boastful or come across as being too ego driven. And I think for especially certain people in the backcountry, I think that it's important to encourage them to like reflect on what skills they do have to offer and to take note of that so they can actually communicate those things. And then I think then for mentors also to ask themselves, like, am I ready to do this? What type of mentee would I be best suited to mentor, and to bring those skills to doing that? I think is really important. And one of the cool things about mentorship is that to me, there's like a lot of reciprocity and kind of like cyclical nature in it, where I've had times where I've been mentored by someone at the same time as I am mentoring somebody. And so I can turn to my mentor and say, do you think I'm ready to do this? Like, does this make sense to you? Are these things that you've seen that I do really well? And so I think, you know, not thinking about one relationship ending before you can start a new one, but yeah, to kind of like carry forth your learning and to ask for feedback from those around you to gain a sense of what you're good at and what you have to offer. And maybe that would help give some clarity and confidence, like stepping forward and saying, I'm interested in taking someone on as a mentee.
And definitely some seem to be more structured, which is really interesting. But go ahead, Lisa.
I was just thinking, for those of us that might work for larger organizations, it's not so easy for me to just turn to somebody and say, hey, I'd like to mentor somebody. Why don't you come out with me for the day? Because I work in a high risk environment and I can't just, you know, make that happen. You know, there'd be a process for me that, at least in Parks Canada, where we'd have to ensure they have a baseline set of skills so that, and maybe there is even some terrain parameters or some parameters in what I will and will not be able to do with this mentee, so that I'm not putting them at undue risk or myself at undue risk because I'm traveling with somebody that's not as skilled. So I think, you know, there are avenues to create this mentor relationship, but I think you have to keep in sight that we do work in a high risk environment, and like, what is that realm that's appropriate to bring somebody based on what skills and training they bring to the table. I think that kind of framework has to be established. So yes, the mentoree has to put some skin in the game in terms of their training and their skill development before they can be prepared to sort of get into more of those formal arrangements if they were going to join in on a larger organization's operation where they may have a little more structure or processes that you would have to address in terms of their risk management policy and people's training. That's maybe a bit of a barrier in some, it could be viewed, but I think I think there's a way to navigate it and have opportunities for people to step in to some of these snow science jobs, respect to avalanche work.
Yeah, I think this applies to us as well, especially when it comes to being out there in the field. It's kind of restricted, but I think it's like encouraging students to do studies that are together with more experienced forecasters and snow scientists is a good way of doing it, so that you can actually do some field work together. You can actually maybe do some work as part of your study or connect. Also, we have quite a bit of courses, and we open up to people from rescue service or other organizations, and trying to create these connections. But it's always you know, it's a priority of time, and it's about safety. So it's not there's a limit to how much you can do it. And then it's we're working together, several organizations, and also with other outside the forecasting service. But I think creating an open that's easy to contact each other, easy to go in the field together and learn from each other. We have meteorologists, we have people experts on roads, and you know, it's a computer scientist, and it's a mix of people that can actually join up and do really great things together and learn from each other. And yeah, be a bit open to actually go and do something with somebody you don't meet regularly. I think that's quite important, you know. But I agree, it's not that easy to just open up to allocate time and also take people out in the field like on a more big scale or random way. Yeah, it's a bit tricky.
Cool. It sounds like we have another question here.
Yes, we have a question from the floor from Eva Latuso. Go ahead, Eva.
Yeah, very interesting panel conversations, and we're actually getting to the meat of the matter. What I wanted to hear from your panelists to discuss is if we get to the point where we have mentors within the formal workplace, and there are mentees who want to participate in these relationships, what kind of guidelines or procedures would you think that could be the guiding document for how these relationships could really flourish? Both from like what Lisa is saying, that there is always lack of time, or Rune is saying that it's hard to network when you're in Svalbard and also, or Doug is saying that there are skill sets that need to match. So what I'd like to see from the industry is come up with kind of like a procedural guideline that would help out the actual nuts and bolts of providing good guidance for the people who are now in a mentorship relationship in their workplace.
Anybody have any feedback from that? That's basically like saying that we've kind of been dancing around that topic for the last while, informal versus a more formal, more structured thing. And we've talked about that more recreationally, is perhaps less formal, and professionally, we're moving into that more formal in terms of, so how do we manage the risk of a mentee, pardon me.
You know, Ava, I mean, in some ways, you probably know the answer more than any of us as to what that might look like, just because you've talked to so many mentees and mentors in the course of your research. I think looking at this panel, like, we come from a really diverse background here, where like Lisa, she has some really strict you know, guidelines as to taking people out, and they seem very appropriate. At the Avalanche Center in Bozeman, we also have some guidelines on that, like from the government, but we also are able to go out in the field with qualified volunteers. So it's easier for us to kind of build those relationships. In terms of something structured, you know, because in a program we have interns, you know, and so we'll have an intern as part of the Avalanche Center, and you know, we'll all meaning everyone who's working at the Avalanche Center takes an interest in this intern, and they get to see us all kind of work, and they learn accordingly, versus a mentorship is very one-on-one, and it requires a lot of energy on both people's parts. You know, I find myself, like, I'll go years without, you know, where I could describe a real mentor relationship, because I just don't have the time to really be putting into it. I guess I'm not sure how to. I guess I just don't have an answer. I don't know how you can really structure it, given the diversity of the programs out there.
I think it's Grant here, just to chime in again from the back. I feel like expectations up front are very important. I think you really need to be clear about what's expected, what the mentors can deliver in terms of time and help, and what the mentees expect. And I think almost like a contract, really, but maybe an informal version of that. But I know in the past I've been really intimidated to, you know, become an official mentor, mostly because of the time requirements. And I'd really like to help, but I'm kind of a bit scared that I won't be able to deliver what the person expects. And what's always been helpful for me is if we can have a really clear set of expectations on both sides up front. And I guess if you were more formalized, like Eva was asking, that would be written down, and, you know, here's what the program expects to deliver. I think that is a really important part to make sure that both parties get the most out of it and people are satisfied.
Yeah, I agree with Grant. I think, you know, although I mean, it is hard to think about a structure that would apply to like a diverse set of people or a diverse set of experiences. And I think looking to our understanding of what makes a good mentorship pair is probably the answer to like starting the development of that structure. And for Mountain Mentors, we use these mentorship charters that mentees and mentors fill out together, where we give them an opportunity to get to know one another. With an intention of fostering like accountability and valuations. They understand why this relationship matters to each other, and we ask them to consider like the purpose of their partnership, the shared goals they might have, practices that would support those goals, and then also that time component, because as I think is being mentioned, that's kind of the thing that gets in the way of a lot of these experiences. But I think starting with those kinds of things and gaining an understanding of what people are actually saying in those moments of the purpose of a mentorship and what their commitments are and what their shared purpose are is actually also really important for us to continue learning in this way. Like mentorship is such a complex topic, as I think we're identifying, and having ways that, like, kind of from like a research perspective, that we could further understand what is required for good and safe mentorship to occur, I think does start with a way of at least like assessing what people are saying, like what, and I think that is being done, and I know these research papers were mentioned, and I think that's awesome. And yeah, just starting off of what makes a good and safe and respectful mentorship pair is a really important thing. So I agree with Grant, in short.
Yeah, and that's great. Like basically you're hearing everybody sort of say it, like it should be formal but not so formal, but it's nice to have some goals identified in terms of what you'd like to sort of see down the road in terms of getting from your mentor. It's nice to have that kind of laid out in terms of what you'd like to get. There's a question here that says, how do you know when to let the mentee make a mistake and when to stop them before they do? Yeah, what strategy you got? Like I know personally, I definitely went out and flew around in a helicopter and threw out a few bombs when my boss was kind of rolling his eyes. And you're not going to get anything. Well, on a highways program, but when have you let people make a mistake, and how do you do it? What are your framework for maybe letting somebody go out there and learn by getting sort of a negative reinforcement?
I think it has to start with evaluating the consequence of letting that situation unfold. Is the consequence going to cause harm, like in Grant's situation? That doesn't sound like it was too healthy. You could have hurt something, but you know, I think that's what I always evaluate, is just what will happen if I just let this sort of go forward. And then, because I've learned some of my greatest lessons too is when I make my mistakes and then look back on it and go, oh yeah, you're right, I could have done that differently, and it resonates with me for a long period of time. So they're valuable lessons to learn that way. So I think for me, it's evaluating that consequence piece beforehand as to how far I let something go.
Yeah, I agree with Lisa on that. Yeah, I mean, failure is part of becoming who we are. I mean, it's incredible piece. And, you know, just like Grant didn't forget the lesson he learned. I mean, all of us, everyone listening has probably had many, you know, examples of where, you know, we've failed, or, you know, even if we're in a mentor position or we were mentees where the mentor let us flail. And, you know, and as a mentor, there are certainly times when letting someone fail is reasonable, as long as the consequences aren't too great. And you just have to know what those consequences are. Like, you know, obviously death is not allowed, but maybe some injuries are. Maybe a sprained ankle is okay. Maybe, you know, where if someone's going to crash the snowmobile, if you're out riding, and, you know, you kind of know that this is at the edge of their ability, you know, do you let them go down the slope, or let them try and high mark it, or not? And so those are just judgment calls you'll make. And as a you know, I made the correlation to guiding versus coaching at the start, and that's where I think for myself, like having experience as a guide allows, you know, allows me to at least, I'm always framing situations that way, such as, you know, what are the consequences? What's going to happen? Because the job isn't to make sure everything is consequence free. It's just to make sure that if something does happen, it falls within those parameters that we can all accept.
Rune, seeing the same thing over in Europe?
Yeah. I don't think I've ever been in a situation in avalanche terrain where I you know, had to face that kind of consequences with other people. But I think it's what we do see is that we're focusing quite a lot on being transparent and actually bringing it to the table if there's a close call. You know, that if there's people in our network that have a close call, they're typically, when we have the observer forecaster workshop in the start of the season, a bit, one or two stories, you know, where where the observers or the forecaster would talk about it and share the experiences. And I think whatever happens, if you want somebody to develop and learn, it's important to be able to talk about it and create an atmosphere where you can talk about it. So if you're like, you know, if you're as a mentor, encourage people to put it under the carpet and never tell anybody about it, you know, and that's your reaction, that would, I think, be very, very dangerous for the future. If it's life in the mountains in the spare time, or if it's professional. So I think that's the you know, that you understand what could have happened, but it's also that there's an environment where you can actually discuss that, and it's not just discussed between two people, but it's an if possible, you know, if it's some part of the culture of an organization. I think that's quite important. As I started saying, that everybody makes mistakes in a way. It's not always a mistake. It's just, you know, shit happens, and yeah.
You know, one of the stronger examples I have is, and one of the more rewarding, goes back to when I was talking about being mentored by those two brothers snowmobiling, where they would most certainly let me flail and flip the sled and do everything. And the reason the relationship worked so well is, A, we liked each other, but they were also getting something from me, which was the whole avalanche piece, you know, which they were really interested in. Like, how do you know if it's going to slide, you know? I mean, and they had when we first met, they had no avalanche education. And so when the mentee and the mentor flip-flop, you know, when that changes, you know, during a course of a day, you know, we stop and dig a pit, suddenly I'm the one kind of the guy in charge, you know, and when we're on the sled, now they are, you know, that's a really neat dynamic. So I think as a mentor, if we can choose mentees that can help us in some way where we can learn from them, that can be incredibly powerful.
For sure, yeah, the concept of symbiotic. Do we have any other questions from the floor there, Brent?
We currently have no questions from the floor, Mike. Lots in the chat, so it looks like.
There's lots of stuff in the chat room here talking about debriefing being super valuable, and I think we all recognize that. I think the culture now is more of this sharing our mistakes with everyone in the industry, which is, it's kind of been a bit of a shift for a lot of us, and something we maybe all did in sort of within our individual groups, but now we're seeing that expand into more of an industry scope, which is wonderful. But here is there value to narrowing our view of mentorship? I'm not quite sure exactly what he means there, but should every relationship we pass on information be considered as a mentorship? So it's just an interesting idea. What exactly is that? That's kind of going back to that, what exactly is a mentorship? So yeah, it's great. I guess we don't have any questions from the floor. We can maybe just have everybody pass on what they think was their most valuable thing, and we can maybe just kind of wind it down with there. We've been going for an hour and 10 minutes here, so we'll let you guys all just kind of pass on your last little sort of, I love Lisa's description there of a garden of information, whatever your best potted plant was, in terms of giving that to everybody else to kind of learn from, and then we'll see if there's any questions, and we'll probably look at wrapping it up. And why don't, Rune, why don't you go first? You're the furthest away.
Yeah, basically, for me, it's like, you know, I have some people in the group that are, and also that are in the forecasting from other organizations actually, that are really talented, you know, in terms of mentoring. And I think making sure that they're actually having some time, and it's the kind of possible for them to do some that kind of mentoring work is a challenge, but it's quite important that there's actually room, and you point them in the right direction as well. You might see other people that are in need of improving skills, or actually need somebody. I mean, some people are just, you know, making decisions and keep going, and others need to reflect and discuss more, and so on. And there might be like high intensity periods when you do forecasting where you actually have to cope with it, and people react differently. So I think connecting people and giving some room for people to act as mentors. maybe not like a contract or anything or a formalized thing, but I think having that in the organization or in the system is quite important to acknowledge also as a manager. Yeah.
No, that's great. Lisa?
I think, there's so many different, all of us are so different in what works for us. And I think having, striving for some sort of database or some sort of relationship where you can identify who's looking for mentors, who'd like to be a mentor, or whether you're in an organization, you need to maybe look for avenues of creating those internships or volunteer relationships that could be in place. But those may not always be there. So I think I'd encourage people as they kind of progress through their training, look around and look around at who could be a mentor, who would you want to partner up with, who might have some of those pieces of information, identify some goals for yourself, some next steps, maybe use some of these people to help you determine what those next steps might be. And then when you're with those people, open the door, say, hey, I am looking to just develop here, or this is what I'm looking for. And that creates the floor to, have that dialogue. It creates the invite for somebody to give you some feedback on your skill development. And then when you get that information, it may not be information you're ready to receive, or maybe you don't necessarily, maybe it's something you look back later and reflect on and go, oh, that actually made sense, or maybe, treat it with a grain of salt, but also treat it like a gift, and reflect on it. Part of your debriefing with that person. I just did a trip, and this woman just on the way back, she just said, I learned this, and this from you. Thank you so much. And I was like, oh, okay. And that just creates that avenue or that openness of sharing. And I was thinking the same thing. I learned so many things from her on these different aspects that she specialized in on this trip. And I think summarizing that exchange and just creating that open platform, looking around you for people that could be those mentors if you're in an area of absence of any of these programs that are out there. That's
cool. Doug, there's a couple questions on the floor, but we'll take what your kind of your takeaway from all this is.
We get to choose who we want to surround ourselves with in life, professionally, personally, we get to choose. And so when there are people that are doing great things, whether it's in the avalanche world or the climbing world, or, we can reach out, and I do reach out, so as a mentee, even now, as a mentee, I reach out to people that are experts, or they have something that I want to learn about, or I like how they do it, and I get to choose to kind of invite them to be a part of my scene, and hopefully they'll say yes. And then on the flip side, when people ask me, I get to choose, is it a good fit? Is this going to work? Do I have the time? Can I see this going somewhere? And, when we surround ourselves with really good people that challenge us, that are experts in areas that we're not, we become better. And I think that's the whole point of the mentorship model or program, is to become better at the things that we love.
Go ahead, Rosemary, and then we'll take our last couple questions from the floor here.
Yeah, awesome. Those are such important things that all of the other three panelists just shared, and I feel like I'm learning so much just even listening from this. So thank you for sharing those. And I don't know that I have too much more to add. Other than this idea, I think for me, what it comes back to is when I think about the environment within which we're all trying to work or recreate, there's a lot of uncertainty. Like, we're all faced with this huge task of making good decisions, both for ourselves and in support of those that we're with, and keeping them safe. And I think the kind of magnitude of the decisions that we're trying to make, or the seriousness of them in some cases, does require us to be champions on each other's behalf, and to take care of one another. And I think in order to do that, we do need relationships that are defined beyond a professional capacity. And I think and mentorship, I think, is a way to get at that. And so I think yeah, this idea of like supporting each other to become like the confident or strong or comfortable or bold or empowered or happy people that we want to be is at the root of that, whether it's like having fun or succeeding in your career. And I just think it's incredible that, you know, we're seeing here in the South Coast of BC, like mentorship is becoming the method through which people are able to access the outdoors, whether it's in recreational or professional capacity. And I think it's in conversations like the one we're having now that we're able to bring awareness to what types of relationships are required for empowering experiences in the outdoors. So I really appreciate hearing all these perspectives and the questions, and I'm learning a ton in being here as well. So thanks so much. Yeah, it's awesome.
So there's a couple questions on the floor. Do we want to stream them in there?
Yes, we actually have just one question on the floor currently, Mike. It's from Tim Johnson. Go ahead, Tim.
Hey guys, I'm currently on the mentorship committee with the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides, and we're struggling a lot with what basically we've been talking about for the last hour and a half, you know, keeping guides within their scope of practices, payment for mentors, how to pair mentors and mentees, and the legality of unpaid internships. And I'm wondering, going back to what Eva brought up, kind of that informal versus formal, if there's not a middle ground to be found. And, you know, something as easy as adding like a mentorship or learning objective to a morning meeting. We talk about snowpack analysis, a hazard analysis, how we're going to deal with the hazards. I'm wondering if one more box is just like, who wants to learn what today? And that way it can be a two-way street as well, like Doug was talking about. Not necessarily just from the gray hairs down to the rest of us, but maybe dealing with some new technology as well. So just a thought, I guess.
Does anyone want to offer any feedback to that? I see we have one more question here that's shown up in the time here.
I think that's a super cool idea, to have a chance in a morning meeting in these kind of like operational contexts to step out of like the kind of weather snowpack run discussion and move into what people are looking to learn is so cool. Yeah, I think that's awesome.
You want to throw that other question up there?
Yes, we have another question from Ilya Storm. Go ahead, Ilya. Ilya, you're muted. If you had a question, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting discussion. I'm struck by the importance of relationships here as being fundamental. I'm also struck by Doug's last comment about the choices that we can make. One thing that I guess I'm asking the panel if you have any thoughts or suggestions here, but it strikes me that there's a challenge here that we should be facing as well, which stems a little bit of trying to look at the differences. I'm thinking about the SLED panel yesterday and the challenges of mentorship that's being found within that community. And I guess I'm also thinking about our industry, which has got gender imbalances. Any thoughts on how we should meet those, how important they are, how we can overcome some of these things?
Who wants to tackle that one first?
Yes, we need to tackle those.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think, you know, what I'm struggling with being on the panel or even just discussing mentorship at this depth is, you know, I clearly have had a little bit more of a informal relationships with people, and what the gentleman before talked about with ACMG and Elia, you know, it's, you know, those are more formal things, like what can we do as an industry to not only mentor, but not only have something in place that we can mentor people, but also make sure that we're doing it in a broader way. It's not just about that one person, it's about the industry. It's about how do we get more equitable? How do we make those kind of choices? And so yeah, that's a great point, and I'm not sure how we do it.
I think that's also a great point, and Doug, a great start to like responding to those questions, which are really challenging ones to respond to. I guess my perspective, like earlier I talked about mentorship as being an opportunity for us to recognize ourselves in like positions of like power, which are essentially being comfortable, being strong, feeling smart, feeling at home in the mountains, feeling empowered where we are, and then asking like who isn't here and how do we design ways to get those folks who want to be into those places as well. And then maybe to address that question, an additional question that we also need to ask is why aren't they here? Because it's not just if we change our ways and provide mentorship and make it more accessible, it's how do we make those places accessible with these people in mind. So it's not just about gender, and I think that that's like a really like important place to be talking about these things as well. But in terms of race or in terms of like sexual orientation and whatever it is that brings people into the mountains, but that question of why aren't they coming and what's stopping them from there. Because it's not enough to say you're welcome here and we are looking for mentees, you should apply, everybody can apply, but we do have to be making steps to addressing the reasons why people aren't seeing themselves there in the first place. And that is a huge conversation. I think a tricky, could probably be its own panel discussion with high importance as well.
Cool. Yeah, so there was a great comment here that I think it was from Carl, just talking about how ideally, hopefully these mentor-mentee relationships eventually develop into relationships where you just, at the end of it, you're essentially peers, which is, I think, sort of a fairly cool comment to look at it. At the end of it, you're just looking across the table at your peer, which is a great way of kind of realizing that hopefully you've done a good job as a mentor. I think Grant had one final comment there, and then we've probably got to wrap it up. Grant, you're hiding in the background there.
I am. I thought that was a good wrapping up remark, Piers. I like that a lot. I just wanted to sort of say that, one thing, I'm not sure if I heard it yet, but, what's been a big learning for me about being a mentor and also having mentors is that it isn't just in the field. And some of the things that have been really important for me to get and to give are to open doors for other people, to use my connections in the industry, to open doors, to write reference letters, to be a sounding board, to give career opportunities. And so when I look at mentorship and I get intimidated by my lack of time to be able to go ski touring or go climbing with somebody, I feel like I can offer other things, whereas they can get that from somebody else maybe, but what I can bring to the table is the ability to open doors for them in the industry and connect them with the right people. And I feel like that's also a really important point. When I came to realize that, I became a lot more comfortable with my role as a mentor because I knew I didn't have to necessarily be in the field, every week with that person.
Cool, thanks, Grant. But I think we're kind of running into our time, which is great. I think it was a pretty cool conversation. I definitely thank everybody for contributing to it. I know, Rune, you're probably getting ready to go to bed. It's probably getting later over there.
Not yet.
We're still having coffee over here. Yeah. But certainly thanks to everybody for coming in and giving your feedback. I think it's been super valuable. I've received a bunch of texts from people sitting here that they've thought it was super valuable, and a variety of people also telling me to go get a haircut. But super good conversation. Thank you very much for everything. And is there kind of a wrap up you want to hop on here, Brent? Oh, there's James. There we go. I can see James. I'm thinking he's going to step in here and wrap it up. Or he's going to look at his keyboard. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks to all of the panelists. That was a really thought-provoking panel discussion. I really appreciate all of your input and all the effort that went into preparing for this. We're going to take a short break now. We'll start the session again at 12:30 Mountain Time with our final oral session of the day. And to lead out into the break, we're going to leave you with our session sponsor video. Thanks once again to Mike, Lisa, Rosemary, Doug, and Runa. We'll leave it there.
Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.